So welcome. We're here to talk today about customizing dashboards in Superset and in Preset, which is basically a SaaS hosted version of Superset. And we're going to talk about a few different ways we can go about this. But first, I'll introduce myself very quickly. I'm a developer advocate with Preset, and I'm also a PMC member for the Apache Superset project. And I just want to shout out here that I'm doing this solo today. So, join Slack if you haven't already. There's the link. It's pretty easy to type in. And then, hit us up on the Customizing Superset channel. Pardon the typo, there should be a T there. Or email me if I don't get to any of your questions today. But we'll try to cover a lot of ground pretty quickly and breeze through some things. And what we are going to cover today is a few different aspects of how you can theme your Superset dashboards and indeed Superset itself to some degree. We're going to cover dashboard CSS, which has dashboards allow you to add a custom layer of CSS styling to them. So we'll show you how that works. We've got chart color palettes, which you can customize for a whole different host of reasons. And then there's theming, which is a whole project that's kind of work in progress, and we'll go into the state of affairs with that effort and show you the ropes. And then we'll leave time for Q&A as well for each of these sections, actually. So phase one of our little three-part act is customizing dashboards with CSS. There's a blog post, which you can get to here. I can't select text for some reason when I'm in presentation mode, but grab a screenshot and check it out later or hit the QR code. And there's a lot more detail on that page than I'll have time to demo here today. So please check that out and read up. But here are the general topics that we're going to cover. We'll get into a couple of examples and I'll do them live. And I'll try to keep an eye on the questions as we go through this. So fire them off if you have any questions or if I skip a step while we do this. Quick tour just to show you where you add this custom CSS. That's pretty essential. So you've got a couple of options. One is this CSS editor or CSS template GUI where you've got a CRUD view basically, and you can add a custom CSS template, call it whatever you want, and then add some CSS here. It should work. I've already got one in here, as you see. We'll get to that in a moment. You can also add these templates in the code base itself. On Preset, we have the ones from the code base stripped out, actually, but you can add and enhance those in the actual Python code base if you want to, but most people just tend to do it through here. Then if you want to actually use those in your dashboard, you go to Edit Dashboard, Edit Properties, and, we'll get to that later. Edit CSS is the one I meant to hit, and this is your live CSS editor, and it really does let you see stuff live. There you go, which is pretty cool. It's also got a couple of other neat features. It's got some degree of autocomplete, and actually, if you do certain things like important, it kind of fills that in for you. It's got some syntax checking and highlights some errors, things like that. It's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get into a little bit of what you'd want to do with this. There are, in the examples I'm about to show you, a few different techniques you'll tend to use. One is that Superset's full of these data test attributes. We use those for our end-to-end testing. But since CSS allows you to select data attributes, or really any attribute on an HTML tag, you can leverage these as well for your styling purposes. They're very handy. And also there's this specific one that comes up all the time. People always want to target one chart or another in a dashboard. So there's a little attribute that's the dashboard chart ID, and this is static, and you'll see that in a minute. And there's also this nth of type selector, which is just a general CSS thing, but it's super useful if you want to get something in the third row of a dashboard or the third column of a certain row. There's 1,000,001 CSS tricks you can use. It supports everything. So if you want to brush up on your CSS techniques, there's a bunch of resources. There's the CSS tricks website and podcast. There's the W3 School website, MDN documentation, caniuse.com. The list goes on and on. But we'll go ahead and go right into an example. So this is the kind of thing that people ask about a lot on Slack and GitHub and so forth, is how can I customize some of these big number charts? Really, it could be any chart, but since this is most frequently requested, we'll just do it. So here, we've got a very simple version of that dashboard open, just some very basic big number charts. And I'm going to go ahead and start, honestly, copy pasting a few things in. This example is on the blog if you want to dissect it, but I thought it'd be good to do one from there. So the first thing I want to do is actually import a different font. And then hopefully you'll be able to see that font change in a minute. But that just imports the font. Then we can do some very basic formatting of the charts themselves. I'm going to add this little background here with a little gradient, change the border radius a little bit. You can really do whatever you want. This is just to kind of prove the point. And this is where things get a little interesting. Here I'm going to go ahead and copying and pasting from Google Slides means you get a lot of line breaks. That shouldn't really be a problem, hopefully. So this applies this little pseudo element, which you can tag on to any given HTML tag, and it sticks it in the bottom, makes it circular, and various other little styling attributes. And of course, what we want to do there is stick the flags of these various regions into those divs. So here's where I'm going to go ahead and use that dashboard chart ID selector, and also you can use the attribute as well to target these. Now, as you can see, when I paste that in, the flag doesn't show up. It doesn't work. That's because I copied and pasted this from a different instance of Superset. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and do a little spelunking here and go in and save this first off. I'm going to go ahead and drill to detail. Nifty feature got in the way there. I'm going to find those IDs real quick. Dashboard chart ID 81, and I'll bet these are sequential. So if I just look for this in a few different spots. Let's see, we've got 79, 81, cool. So I'll go ahead and edit again. There it is. It's working. So once those actually work, it shouldn't be a big deal to worry about them. That number should stay the same forever. Okay, then last one, this last chart here, we want to go ahead and stick in a background, which is another totally royalty-free image from Wikimedia. Thanks for that. And I'm not going into too much of the CSS, obviously. But, oops, no, it's not. There we go. Okay, so this sticks the background in there, and then I went ahead and used that font from Google. I gave it a text shadow because why not? And there you have it, except I don't see the background. Why is that? Oh, there it is. Ta-da. And then some things look a little goofy in preview mode, as you just saw. It was kind of transparent, but when you actually view the dash, it's fully opaque. So that's the one example. So for this, I mean, they're kind of arbitrary things I'm doing, but a lot of people might want to add a layer to the background here that might sit behind a certain type of graph that indicates safe zones and danger zones or something like that. Or you might be showing customer data here and want to stick their logo in the corner. Really, sky's the limit. You can do all sorts of things with CSS. This is just kind of showing you how you access particular charts. So then I'll go ahead and do one more example. This is another thing people have asked about that wasn't covered in the blog, where you might have a couple of charts that are conceptually connected. So you want to actually, physically connect them. So here we're going to remove the gap between the two charts. We're going to straighten out the corners. We're going to remove the title from this. We could remove this little overflow menu or not, dealer's choice, but maybe I'll show you both. So here, let's go ahead and edit this sample dashboard again. If I go in here, then this is where we start to use some of those of type CSS selectors. I'm going to go ahead and paste the whole thing in here. Oops, copied too much. So in the dashboard, there's all these drag droppable rows and drag droppable columns. So those are the kind of X and Y coordinates you want to use to target certain charts. And this is grabbing the first one and adding or changing the margin from, I think it's 16 pixels down to 0. You've got to use this important thing here because there's a really long CSS selector that you want to override. And as I'm going to tell you later, these important tags are kind of dangerous. You want to use them sometimes if you've got some crazy selector or the load order of the CSS files is somewhere where it's difficult to override a style, but you want to try to minimize use of those because if you start getting fancy with things, I guarantee you will trip up and start having to put importance to cover your own importance, and you kind of start to run out of the nuclear option of CSS selectors. So as you can see, this isn't really applying in our preview, and that's because there's a couple of elements in the dashboard that don't exist when you're rendering it just as a viewer. So all I'm doing here really is removing that padding, changing the border radius on these bottom corners and on these top corners, and then sticking together. And I've got two bits of stuff here, one to remove just the title and one that removes the whole bar, including that overflow menu. So hopefully this will work. It worked yesterday, and there it is. Okay. So hooray, all that stuff is happening and they're connected. The caveat, if you do weird things like removing bits of UI like I just did, you can't edit that chart anymore from the dashboard. So, you know, do this stuff at your own risk. All right. Pressing on. So I think I covered a couple of these gotchas, but some other ones that are important to note is that the DOM, or the document object model, the structure of the web page's HTML is not a contract. If you start using these CSS templates, you're probably pretty safe for a while, but as we refactor code, change React modules, component libraries, all that kind of stuff, the HTML and the classes that are used by it are subject to change. And that's not something that we as Superset consider to be a breaking change in terms of, you know, release management. So this stuff could change underneath you. And if you start setting up really complicated templates, you're going to have to maintain them, and you're on your own at that. And then not everything can be styled. Somebody asked the other day about how to do a radar chart where the outer numbers and graphics were basically a little light. They were kind of low contrast, and I agree. But unfortunately, since that's it's actually a canvas element, you can't really target that with CSS. So in that case, you'd have to go and make a change to the code, which we'll get to theming later, but there's a bright future for that. I already talked about important a little bit, and then very important, use comments. I've gone back and tried to maintain some of my own templates, and it gets really painful if you don't leave notes for yourself about why you have something there. And then if you want to contribute to this effort and make things even cooler, there's a bunch of stuff we can do. Like I mentioned, for hitting specific charts, there's that chart ID number thing. You can add more classes like that and data attributes and things like that. They make testing easier, they make styling easier. So please open a PR, it's cool. It doesn't support Sass or anything like that, SCSS, whatever you want to call it. That would be a really neat add-on. The templates that are built into Superset are aging and not terribly well at that. So if anybody wants to add new ones or improve the existing ones, that would be really cool. And then, of course, ping me on Slack, and you can ask and answer questions about all the CSS stuff, or you can ask for more examples that weren't covered in that blog, and I'm happy to you know, keep doing little ninja edits to that thing and grow it over time. So, okay. Regarding that blog, there's lots of other examples there that we didn't cover here. We're moving right along. We've got 2 more things to cover. But yeah, hit me up with more requests, and we'll dial it in. So are there any questions about CSS stuff before we move on to the next chapter? I just kind of want to address them now if I'm able. Oh, there's a whole bunch. Okay, the code is available on the blog. I will share the link on Slack, and or you can look it up on the preset website. It's very easy to find. We've got a couple of specific requests of how to do things. I'll cover those later if I'm able. Yeah, somebody asked if the concatenation of charts is the same as kind of putting them in a column layout and changing the background color. Yes, and I guess that's kind of the story of CSS is there's always multiple ways to tackle something. There's always just many techniques to kind of do what you're after with styling. So I was just showing that. Contact me on Slack. LinkedIn is cool, but Slack is where I spend my day. And then there's a question about fetching data and currencies and so forth. Currencies are another level of customization that's been coming up a lot, and I hope we can actually do another blog post about how exactly to do that, because there's a lot of currencies in the world, and you probably don't want a super long list of every world currency in your Superset Select menu. So yeah, that's a whole other topic. But moving right along to chapter 2, how are we doing on time? Okay, that was probably the long chapter. I'll speed up. Customizing chart colors. So Superset also supports theme colors that you can use to color your visualizations. There's another blog that goes deep on this. So, take a screenshot if you want to get this URL or use the QR code. I can also paste the link on Slack, or you can find it on the preset blog. But there's a couple of spots you find these. One is in the dashboard properties editor, which if you're in edit mode, you simply go to the properties and you've got this lovely color scheme selector here. And then the other is in the chart itself. Whoops. So within the chart controls, you have the ability to pick a color palette for your specific chart. Now, there's a couple of types of color palettes that we support. One is sequential, where it's essentially a gradient or a color range. So there's all sorts of reasons you might want to do that. A couple we'll talk about are like cold to hot or rag, red, amber, green kind of statuses, things like that. And then there's categorical color palettes as well, where it kind of round robin assigns a color to all of your different series in your data. And we support both of those and customizing both of those. There's also a topic that we need to go into about color consistency. This is a whole body of work that was done to make it so that if you use a color for a series, it applies to all of the charts it's able to in a dashboard automatically. A lot of people used to do this custom in JSON, which I'll show you in a few minutes, to manually assign a color to a series, but now it tries to apply that very consistently. And if you go and edit a chart from a dashboard, it pops it open and it carries that color palette into the chart builder experience. The original chart remains untouched. If you need to get to that, you would just go to the chart list and go to it very directly. But if you access it from a dashboard, the color palette comes along, so you have that kind of consistency and understanding and editing the chart when you go back and forth in those sorts of workflows. And this is actually, it sounds simple, but it's a super complicated feature in the way this works. And certain glitches do apply, where if you edit a chart and go back to the dashboard, you might see identical colors next to each other or something like that. If you ever get stuck or in some weird state, you can remove the color palette from the dashboard and reapply it, and that kind of resets the algorithm to reapply that color scheme. So that's, it happens, and we're working on it, trying to smooth that stuff out. Then if you want to get into creating custom label colors, you can do that in the dashboard metadata. And when you do so, it actually warns you on the dashboard color palette picker that that's the case. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. But let's do that now, actually. So if I go to something like this, then go to edit dashboard, and you can edit properties, pop open the advanced tab, and somewhere down in here, there it is, label colors. So since this is airline stuff, I happen to have a little snippet here of all these airline codes. WN is Southwest, F9 is Frontier, American Airlines, I forget what the other ones are, United, I don't remember. But I looked up their brand colors and added those as hex values. By the way, this also supports RGB, HSA, whatever kind of CSS color. You can use all of that stuff. And when you apply that and save it, then there you go. You've got your Southwest blue, you've got your American Airlines red. So you can do this with your customer logo colors or your product colors, whatever the heck they are. Then, if you want to edit these palettes on open source, that's basically something you do in code. If you go to the config.py file, there's a couple of sections, one for categorical, one for sequential, and you disable this line, just comment it out, and you can uncomment this block. In fact, maybe I'll just do that real quick. I think we have time. So here, I did this last night, actually. So this is the default line that I commented out, and I added a couple of sequential color schemes here. One that's red, amber, green, or RAG, as they say in some industries. Then there's the cold to hot one with the middle color of white, so it kind of diverges toward that in the center of that. And then let's see, I thought I had some other ranges here. Oh yeah, a couple of categorical ones. This is the old Fisher-Price xylophone that some of you probably grew up with. These are kind of randomly chosen, the Olympic green colors. Why not? So now that those are in here, if I go to one of these charts, you should actually see them at the bottom of the list. Yeah, so there's my cold to hot palette. And then if this was data that was warning you about the status of something, you might use the RAG colors like that. And then over here, we've got our fancy new stream graph support on our eCharts Viz plugin. In case you haven't played with that, it's actually pretty rad. Yeah, we'll do something fun like that as a side note. And I'll go ahead and use the Fisher-Price xylophone colors. And there you go. There's a rainbow mess. That may be meaningful to somebody. But anyway, that's something you can play with. And if you want to do this on preset and you happen to be an enterprise customer, then there's another way to do this, which is that we have a color palette builder. So if you want to add a new palette, you simply go in here and click that, and you can add some colors, as many as you want for a categorical palette or for a sequential palette. You can pick the outer extremes, and then you can pick the option to add a middle color if you so choose. So I've got a couple of those pre-built that you probably saw on the blog post. This is a minty palette, which is a terrible idea for visualization because the colors are not that distinct. But you can go in here and pick whatever you want, and then it actually displays them in this kind of example pseudo chart, so you can see it in situ. And when you do that, it shows up in your Superset instance, your Superset workspace on preset. And the same is true for gradient color palettes. So this one is using white as the middle color. It's the same as that cold to hot one I showed you a minute ago. Okay, so going back to the slides, there's the demo. And then I'll take any color palette questions for a moment, or questions about the other kind of palette. Somebody's asking how to hide or show charts on Superset. You can do that with CSS if you want to target them specifically. But there's not too many other kind of dynamic ways of doing that. I'd be interested to hear the use cases if somebody has specific rhymes or reasons of why they might like to hide or show charts in the dash, but it's going to lead to some screwy dashboard layouts, I'll tell you that much. Best way to tag specific colors to a specific metric. That was essentially what I was showing you with the series colors in the JSON editor. If that metric has a title, you should be able to, and it's used in charts, you should be able to target it just by name, just the name and the color value you want to use in that JSON blob, and it'll map. And it'll override the dashboard color palette that you've assigned to the dashboard. All right, that's the questions we have there for the moment. Keep thinking of more, that I'm trying to leave time at the end here. And then theming Superset. So this is the third part of our three-ring styling circus here. This blog I was hoping to get out by today, but it didn't happen. But here's a sneak preview of what I'm going to be going into depth about. theming. And this is probably going to be the most powerful and interesting part of styling Superset in general, not just dashboards, but the entire UI. So I want to disambiguate it from CSS because the CSS applies to dashboards, even though it can apply to like the global nav and things like that outside the scope of the dashboard itself. It really only gets applied when you're viewing that dashboard page. So theming is applied to all of Superset, every page. And it's also different from color palettes. When you add colors and styles and things to a Superset theme, the Viz color palettes are still kind of their own entity that treat charts the way they do. But what it is JavaScript styling attributes. So this is a big JSON object that holds all sorts of type values and color values, and it gets reused by the JavaScript, the React modules that are the front end is comprised of. So when you make these changes, they should be picked up by the React components down the tree and style basically everything. Under the hood, it's using a library called Emotion. There's a handful of links here. I can share this whole slide deck, by the way, if anybody's agonizing over the links. I'm not copy pasting, but it's CSS and JS. So it basically, in your React components, it takes these values from the global theme object and applies them as needed to that particular component. And there's some documents on how to develop with that, best practices, the rationale of why we're using it, and of course you can check out the library itself. That theme exists in Superset UI, which is one of our many NPM modules that Superset's built out of. Superset is a mono repo. There's a bunch of packages in there, including all those Viz plugins. From there, it's imported and it's picked up by all of these libraries. And I was going to put the code example there, but I didn't. Sorry about that. What the theme is built out of is basically this at the moment. And this is going to be expanded on. But you have things like your border radius. There's little rounded corners all over the place. If you wanted to make that 8 pixels so everything's bubbly or cool, you've got your primary color that's used for things like buttons, and grayscale is used in all sorts of different surfaces of the UI. And then, of course, you've got your semantic error warning alert success info colors. A lot of things are transparent in Superset for various reasons. So all those opacity stops are here. And you've got the very basics of typographic style here. You've got the fonts we're using for different purposes, a few weights and sizes. So if you want to have giant headers that are applied everywhere, you can change that. And well, you can, but it's not perfect yet. We'll get into this, the ups and downs of this in a minute. But there's a couple of ways to tweak this. One is by going into that code I was just showing you in Superset UI. And if you deploy your own instance of Superset, you can do that and just change what's there, no problem. But also in config.py, as of fairly recently, there's this theme overrides bit that does a merge of what you type here on top of that existing theme using Lodash, which is like the coolest library ever. And so you can override single values and do things like your brand colors. Now, can you use it today? It's risky, it's early. You probably shouldn't, but you can toy around with it and you can do certain things. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that. And let me try to switch more effectively to VS Code to do this. But we'll talk about the readiness. I'm gonna show you kind of where this is at very visually, and what the limitations of it are. But there's a Superset improvement proposal, or a SIP, that's out right now that explains a lot of those shortcomings in depth and what efforts remain to get it working properly and systemically throughout the entire UI, which is definitely a huge goal because everybody's always saying, where is dark mode? And this represents the effort that's needed to pull that off properly. And the big chunks of that effort are getting everything into React. We're still using Flask App Builder under the hood that does Python generated static server pages. And once we get rid of those and turn it into a proper React front end application, then we can get rid of all of these less files that are essentially CSS. And We need to bump the Ant Design library that is our fundamental component system, because now that's much more themable than it used to be when we first implemented it. And we need to apply the superset theme that I just showed you. All of those values need to map directly to eCharts. Our primary visualization library supports theming, so we need to map our colors to their colors, and do the same thing with AntD once that's upgraded. And we also need to add part of the SIP, if you want to read it, is that we want to get into some more kind of semantic style definitions for, you know, background surfaces, foreground surfaces, and get into different sorts of type families. So there might be like a monospace or code font definition where you can change the size and color and everything of that particular type of font treatment. And then basically it's just going to be combing through the repo and setting up a bunch of linting rules and stuff like that to make sure that we don't have any hard-coded values and we're using these theme attributes all over the place. So it's a big body of work. If anybody feels like getting involved in this effort, just hit me up or join the Customizing Superset channel or the Improving Superset channel, and we can talk about all the myriad tasks we can get into there. Okay. So let me change over to VS Code for a second, and I'll show you what I did as a little goofy example. So if I uncomment all of this theme override stuff, which is not the actual comment string, and I'm going to turn this off. Actually, you know what? I'll give you 2 in 1 here. Let me comment this out. So what you might be able to do today is use the primary color, which is buttons and things like that. You can change primary and secondary to red and green in this example. And the grayscale main color that's used in a lot of places is turned to orange here just for proof of concept. This is exactly what you'll see in the code. And if you do that and then reload a page like this one, you'll see it in use. And it's not pretty, but it means you can use your brand color for buttons and things like that. So this should be working. Oh, did I forget to? Yep, gotta comment that part out. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so now you can see that what's supposed to be grayscale, the base color of grayscale is orange. We changed the corner radius of a lot of things, and what used to be kind of that green blue button is now red by default. You can change the other states too, of course. So it ain't pretty, but it illustrates the point. And then if you want to go extra crazy, what I did and won't show is I took the grayscale color range from the default theme and inverted it, because everybody wants to know about that dark mode. So here's a very ugly version of dark mode. And if I load that behind the scenes and refresh, might take Superset a second to chew on that. Processing. Here we go. Okay, there you go. Sneak preview of coming attractions. One day this will work. But as you can see, not everything is affected by theming yet. So we have a bunch of Ant design components like the global navigation here, some of these inputs and things like that that aren't thoroughly using those theming variables yet. And this is also you know, one of many charts in Superset that are going to need styling treatment as well. The eCharts ones can all be done in one fell swoop, which is going to save a heck of a lot of time, but the legacy ones are going to be a bit of a long tail effort. You can click around and see that this is true in most things, like list views are not great. This text should be like super light instead of super dark. But once we theme Ant design, which is the components that you're largely seeing unthemed here, and get those eCharts, then I think it's actually going to be at a pretty usable beta state. So I'm very excited about that frontier. There's more to do, but it's getting there. So with that, I'll actually bring on the David S. Pumpkin slide and see if anybody has any additional questions about theming or CSS or color palettes or any of that stuff. Somebody's asking if there's any boilerplate CSS to start off with. The closest options you've got there are the example templates that are built into the code base, or going to that the blog that I wrote that has a bunch of stuff in there. There's even a really terrible dark mode CSS template that hits a lot of common areas to kind of give you some useful selectors to riff on. Somebody asked if there will be a drag and drop interface to edit color palettes. There is on preset. I guess not drag and drop per se, but oh, well, I guess I'm referring to chart creation. If you mean applying chart palette colors to charts, that is not yet the drag and drop experience. That's certainly an interesting idea. I'll bring that up with the product team. Then can you use custom CSS properties as values? Using CSS variables and so forth, if that's what you mean. That's not really greatly supported, although the Ant design library and its theming, I believe, is going to use CSS variables. So there might be a little bit of a interface to hack on there. We haven't done that Ant upgrade yet. Once we do the upgrade, we'll find which of the various approaches works best for that, and variables might be part of the puzzle. Okay, somebody's sharing a French design system that they'd like to start implementing, and that's great. There's a lot of different design systems that come into play when we're talking about things like theming. The concepts that are laid out in the SIP, shout out to Michael Molina for writing that, are largely based on material design, which is, you know, kind of the household name in design and theming systems. So they've got some good concepts we're going to rip off. And then somebody's asking, can we add custom Ant-D React components? Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is open source. All of this stuff is fair game to play with. PRs are welcome. So if you feel like there are components that are not being used or not being available that you'd like to implement in Superset, by all means add them. The thing we usually do is kind of add a little thin layer to those Ant-D components so we can kind of limit or set a few of the props by default, add a little bit of baseline styling to those components. So we'll kind of use a Superset global component that uses Ant-D under the hood. And the reason we do that, partly for just keeping it clean, but also so that one day, if we ever need to move away from Ant-D for some reason, then we just need to update our base Superset components to leverage the new library. It'll be easier than the current migration we're undergoing. All right, not seeing any other questions. Oh, wait. Somebody's got a whole set of React components compliant with their design system. Would I recommend replacing the React components or styling the existing components? I would say style the existing ones. If you find shortcomings in the styling of what's available on Superset right now, that's the kind of improvement that would behoove everybody. What you're seeing as a shortcoming is probably a shortcoming to somebody else. So the more thematic hooks we have in our Superset components, the better, and then we can all benefit from that. So yeah, PR is welcome. We can have a whole other meetup around getting into the code of it if you ever want to. Someone asks what the lift or work involved of spreading the theme through the code base is. I think it's those main things. It's applying the theme to the eCharts theme. It's applying the theme to Ant-D, which requires a major Ant-D upgrade, which will probably break a few things. So we need to be very careful about that upgrade. And then we need to remove the remaining Flask app builder server generated views and basically move those to being React views in the single page application that Superset is becoming. In fact, there's one PR we're about to remerge that converts one of those major ones around permissions. So it's happening piece by piece. And somebody's curious about customizing tooltips on map elements. Gosh, tooltips, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. There's probably, well, there's a will, there's a way, but I don't know. I'll look into that. And I think that's it for the questions. So at that point, or at this point, I'll go ahead and say thank you all. If you have more questions, again, please join Slack. Let me get you the link and just paste that in the chat really quick, because that's important. You should all be on there. Everyone. There you go. There's the Slack. And then, yeah, join us in customizing Superset. Let me know what I didn't answer. Let me know what examples you want to see. Let me know if you want to contribute, all that stuff. We can keep making this better. So thank you all. See you next time.